The scream never came. That was the part nobody talked about afterward. How Olivia Hayes didn't make a single sound when Derek Voss slammed her against the concrete wall behind Harlow General Hospital, his forearm crushing her throat, his face 2 inches from hers. Blood from a cut above her eyebrow traced a slow line down her cheek. Her vision blurred at the edges. His breath reeked of bourbon and entitlement. "Say it," he whispered. "Say you're nothing." Nurses 20 feet away heard nothing. The security camera above them had been disabled 3 days prior. What Derek Voss did not know, what nobody in Callaway Ridge knew, was that the woman he had just put his hands on had once stabilized 4 soldiers under direct enemy fire in a collapsing forward operating base with only a trauma kit and 2 functioning hands. She wasn't nothing. She was the worst thing he'd ever made the mistake of touching. If this story already has you holding your breath, stay with me until the very end. Like this video, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The morning it all started unraveling had been ordinary in every way that mattered. Olivia Hayes clocked in at 6:47 a.m., 13 minutes early, the same way she had every shift for the past 11 months. She pulled her dark hair into a knot at the base of her neck, snapped on a pair of nitrile gloves, and picked up the first chart before the outgoing night nurse had finished her handoff report. The ER at Harlow General was already running. 2 chest pains in Bay 3 and 4, a teenager with a dislocated shoulder in Bay 7, and an elderly man at triage who kept insisting he just needed water and a quiet place to sit down. Callaway Ridge wasn't a small town, but it wasn't quite a city either, somewhere in between. The kind of place where the same 30 families had run everything for 3 generations and called it community. The kind of place where knowing the right last name got you a parking ticket torn up, a complaint buried, a problem quietly redirected. Harlow General occupied 4 city blocks near the river, and it had been partially funded and politically shielded by the Voss family since before Olivia was born. She knew none of that yet. Not on day 1, not even on day 90. She'd come to Callaway Ridge for the same reason most people reinvent themselves somewhere new, because the place she'd left had too many faces in it that she no longer wanted to see. 4 years of Army combat medicine, 2 deployments, 1 incident in the Kandahar province that she'd never written down in full because she didn't trust paper with the things that mattered most. She came home intact in every clinical sense of the word, and broken in every way that didn't show up on a discharge physical. Her mother lived 40 minutes outside Callaway Ridge in a house with a porch and a bad water heater, and that had been reason enough. Harlow General hired her without hesitation. Her credentials were immaculate. Her references read like a field manual. During the interview, the nursing director, a compact woman named Patrice Dunmore, had looked at Olivia's service record and said, "We've had candidates with better grades and worse nerves. You seem like the opposite of that." Olivia had said thank you and meant it. She was good at the job. Not in the performed, eager way that made colleagues feel quietly competitive, just good. Clean technique, fast assessment, the kind of muscle memory that kicks in before the conscious brain catches up. She'd been trained in conditions where a wrong call wasn't a liability form. It was a body bag, and that pressure had stripped away every unnecessary motion until what remained was efficient and sure. Her coworkers respected her the way people respect weather. They didn't always like it, but they didn't argue with it either. Derek Voss noticed her on her 3rd week. She was suturing a laceration in Bay 2, a construction worker who'd taken a nail gun to the forearm, when Derek walked through the ER with the specific stride of someone who believed the building had been constructed for his personal use. He was 22, broad-shouldered, dressed in the kind of casual wear that cost more than most people's rent. His father was Marcus Voss, whose development company had built half of downtown Callaway Ridge, and whose charitable donations to the hospital bought his family a level of access that normal citizens didn't get. Derek had a visitor's badge clipped to his jacket. He used it to go wherever he wanted. He stopped outside Bay 2 and watched her work. Olivia finished the suture without looking up. "Nice hands," he said. She tied off the last stitch, set down the forceps, and looked at her patient. "You're going to want to keep this dry for 48 hours. I'll send instructions home with you." The construction worker nodded, glancing sideways at the doorway. Derek smiled. He had the kind of smile that was used to getting there first. I'm talking to you. I heard you, Olivia said, and snapped off her gloves. She walked out of the bay on the other side. It should have ended there. It would have, with a different person, in a different building, in a different city. But Callaway Ridge was the kind of place where people like Derek Voss were accustomed to the conversation continuing until they decided it was over. He started appearing on her shifts. Not every day. That would have been too obvious, and Derek wasn't stupid so much as he was unaccustomed to boundaries that applied to him. He'd sit in the family waiting area near the ER entrance and watch the floor. He'd find reasons to be near the nurse's station when she was charting. He'd stop in doorways and make comments to the people around her that were technically about something else, but pointed at her. "She's pretty serious, isn't she?" he said once to a male nurse named Garrett, loudly enough for Olivia to hear from 8 feet away. Like someone stapled a stick to her spine. Garrett laughed, then looked uncomfortable, then found somewhere else to be. Olivia marked it in her memory the same way she marked everything: location, time, specific words. She'd learned in the military that documentation was armor. You wore it before you needed it, not after. She reported it to Patrice Dunmore 6 weeks in, kept it factual, listed dates, times, the specific comments. Patrice listened with the expression of someone hearing information they already have a response prepared for. "Derek can be a lot," Patrice said carefully. "His family has a long relationship with this hospital. I'd encourage you to not engage when he tries to get a reaction. He gets bored." Olivia looked at her. "He's been on this floor 9 times in the past month. He's not a patient. He doesn't have family admitted. Is there a policy about visitor access?" Patrice's expression shifted just slightly. Not threatened, but recalibrated. "I'll speak with security." Nothing changed. By month 3, the comments had graduated into something more deliberate. Derek had started bringing friends. 2 of them. A wiry guy with expensive sneakers named Cole, and a quieter one everyone called Bridge, who seemed to exist primarily to laugh at Cole's commentary. They'd park near the nurse's break room and rate the staff in voices loud enough to be clearly intentional. When Olivia walked past them, Cole said, "There she is, the one who thinks she's too good to smile." "Army girls are like that," Derek said. "Uptight, compensating." "Compensating for what?" Bridge asked. "For not being that interesting without the uniform." Olivia stopped walking. It wasn't a decision. Her feet just stopped. She turned around slowly and looked at Derek with the particular quality of attention that most people, if they were paying close enough attention to themselves, would recognize as a kind of warning. "You need to stop coming to this floor," she said. Derek looked genuinely pleased. "I'm a visitor. Public hospital. I have a badge." "Visitor badges are for visiting patients. You're not visiting a patient." "My dad funded this wing." "That doesn't buy you access to the staff." His smile changed. Something went out of it, and something else came in. Not anger exactly, but something closer to a decision. "You're going to regret making this into a thing," he said. "Already regret it," Olivia said. "Not going to change what I said." She walked away. The difference, she told herself later in the parking lot, was that she'd seen what came after this kind of exchange before. She'd seen it in forward operating bases where rank and ego ran into each other in narrow corridors. She'd seen it in the way certain men cataloged being corrected, not as something to move on from, but as a debt to be collected. She drove home, ate dinner standing at the kitchen counter, and called her mother. "You sound tired," her mother said. "I'm okay." "You always say that." "I'm actually okay this time." She wasn't. The harassment against the hospital volunteers started in October. That was the piece Olivia hadn't expected, that he'd expand his audience. There was a junior volunteer program at Harlow General, mostly college students, and a handful of high school seniors doing community hours. Derek and his group had apparently found them easier entertainment than a combat vet who didn't flinch at their commentary. A 19-year-old named Sasha told Olivia about it first. She was a pre-nursing student at Callaway Community College, bright and nervous in equal measure, and she'd taken to following Olivia around on Tuesday shifts in the quiet way of someone hoping some of the calm would transfer. "They took her phone," Sasha said, in the break room, voice low. "One of the volunteers. Danica. She dropped it, and one of them kicked it down the hall. And when she went to get it, Derek, he said something to her. I don't know exactly what. She went into the bathroom and cried for like 20 minutes. Did she report it? Sasha gave her a look that was too old for her face. Olivia knew what the look meant. She filed a second formal report anyway, this time specific to the volunteer incident, with Sasha's account attached and a note requesting that Derek Voss's visitor access be formally reviewed or revoked. 2 days later, she found a note in her locker. It hadn't been forced open. Someone had slipped it through the vents, printed on plain paper. You don't know who you're dealing with. She photographed the note, bagged it, kept it in her car. The administrator who handled her second complaint was a man named Howard Belk. He had the energy of someone who'd spent 20 years finding the middle of every controversy and staying there. He called Olivia into his office and sat across the desk from her with both palms flat on the surface, like he was trying to hold it down. "I've reviewed your report," he said. "And?" "These are serious allegations." "Yes." "Derek Voss is... His family's relationship with this hospital is significant. His father serves on our board." Olivia said nothing. Howard adjusted one of his palms. "What I'm trying to say is that we need to handle this with appropriate care for everyone involved, including Danica, the 19-year-old volunteer who cried in the bathroom." A muscle twitched near Howard's left eye. "Including her. I'll be meeting with all relevant parties." He also left a note in my locker. Howard's expression suggested he would very much prefer she hadn't said that. "Notes are... There's no proof of origin. It was slipped through the vent. The only people who know my locker number are staff and administration." She let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. "I'm not asking you to fire him. I'm asking you to revoke his visitor access while it's being investigated. I'll take it under consideration." She left the office knowing that phrase meant no. November started wet. The river that ran along the east side of Callaway Ridge came up higher than it had in years, and the city put temporary flood barriers along the downtown corridor. The construction had rerouted foot traffic in weird ways, blocked alleys, redirected parking, the back end of Harlow General's property cut off from the main road for stretches at a time. It was the kind of geography that Olivia, in retrospect, should have been more careful about. She noticed she was being watched more deliberately around the 3rd week of the month. Not Derek himself. She could handle Derek in her field of vision. It was subtler than that. A car idling too long near the night shift exit. A familiar laugh she couldn't trace to a body. The feeling, trained into her over 2 deployments, that the perimeter had changed. She started varying her exit times. Parked in different spots. Told exactly no one. Because telling people in Callaway Ridge had proven, empirically, to accomplish nothing. On a Thursday evening in late November, she stayed 40 minutes past the end of her shift to help with a complicated trauma admission. Car accident on Route 9, 2 criticals, short-staffed on a night when it would have been wrong to leave. She didn't mind the extra time. She'd never learned how to mind it. She left the building at 9:22 p.m. through the rear medical training corridor exit, which she'd been using because the main lot was still partially blocked by flood construction equipment. The light above the exit door was out. She registered it, noted it as something to log in the morning, and kept moving. The parking area behind the training wing was half lit. 1 functioning security light at the far end, 1 dead bulb overhead, a stretch of shadow between them. She was 15 steps into that shadow when she heard him behind her. She turned. Derek Voss was alone this time. No Cole, no bridge, just him and the space between her and the building and the construction barriers that had redirected normal foot traffic away from this corner of the property entirely. "You should have taken the hint," he said. His voice was different from how it was in the hallways. Flatter, stripped of the performance. Olivia measured the distance to the functioning security light. 20 feet. Measured the distance to him. 8 feet and closing. "I'm going to need you to stop walking," she said. "Or what?" He kept coming. "You'll file another report. Give it to Howard." He laughed, and the sound of it had no humor in it at all. "You know what my father told me about people like you? They make noise until they realize it costs them more than it costs us." She'd seen this before too, the architecture of it, the moment before the moment. "You need to stop," she said again. Her voice was steady. Her hands were already calculating. He didn't stop. He moved fast for someone who looked like he'd never had to be fast, closed the remaining distance in 2 steps, and grabbed her by the front of her scrub top, spinning her hard into the concrete wall of the training wing. The impact was sharp across her shoulder blades. Something in her head knocked the back of the wall, and her vision stuttered. Then his forearm came up across her throat. The pressure was immediate and real, not a shove, not a warning. He meant the weight of it. "I've been patient," he said, close. "That's done. You're going to walk into Howard's office tomorrow and you're going to say you made everything up, and then you're going to put in your resignation." His arm pressed harder. "Or we can keep doing this until you get the message some other way." The blood from the cut, she'd hit the edge of a protruding bolt on the wall, she realized later, started its slow track down her cheek. Olivia let him finish talking. She'd learned something about men like this in the military. They needed the speech more than they needed the outcome. The speech was the point. It was the part where they felt like the situation confirmed everything they believed about themselves. So she let him have it. And then, when he'd finished, she did 3 things in a sequence that took less than 4 seconds total, none of which she would describe in the report she filed later, because the report needed to be about what he did, not what she knew how to do. When it was over, Derek Voss was on the pavement. He was uninjured in any documentable way. He was also not standing up. She looked down at him and said quietly, "I want you to understand something. I have filed reports. I have been professional. I have done everything the correct way and through the correct channels. That part is still true. What is also true is that if you come near me again, I will not call it anything. I will just remember it." She walked to the functioning security light, took out her phone, and called 911. The responding officer, young, uncertain, his eyes going from her cut forehead to Derek on the pavement and back, spent 6 minutes taking her statement before Derek's own phone started ringing. The officer glanced at the screen. She watched the officer's face change when he saw the contact name. He took the call. The conversation was short. When the officer hung up, he looked at Olivia with the specific expression of someone being asked to hold 2 incompatible things at the same time. "Mr. Voss says he was the one who was assaulted," the officer said. Olivia looked at her own throat in the reflection of her phone screen. The bruising was already starting, a dark band across the left side of her neck where the forearm had pressed. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor," she said. The supervisor took 40 minutes to arrive. He was a man she didn't know, and he looked at the situation with the eyes of someone who'd already been briefed on which outcome was preferred. "We're going to need to take statements from both parties," the supervisor said. "I understand," Olivia said. Given who is involved, this may take some time to sort out." "I understand that too." She understood all of it. What she did while she waited, standing in that half-lit parking lot in November cold with blood drying on her cheek, was take out her personal phone, open her contacts, and scroll to a name she hadn't called since leaving the service. The name was Marcus Webb. He was 47, currently working private security consultation out of a firm in the state capital. Before that, 14 years Army Criminal Investigation Division. Before that, the kind of field work that didn't go on public resumes. She'd saved his number the way she saved everything important, without knowing when she'd need it, but knowing she would. He picked up on the second ring. "Webb? It's Hayes." A pause. Then, "It's been a while." "Yeah," she said. "I have a situation." Define situation. She looked at the supervisor talking quietly on his own phone 20 feet away. She looked at Derek Voss, now sitting up, talking to the young officer with the ease of someone who'd been in this conversation before and always knew how it ended. "The kind where the right people already know the wrong outcome," she said. Another pause. Longer this time. "Where are you?" "Callaway Ridge." She heard the particular silence of someone running a search they already knew the answer to. "Voss territory," Marcus Webb said. "Yeah." "Okay." His voice shifted into something more specific, the way a switch engages. "Don't say anything else to the officers tonight. You give them the basic statement, you get your medical documented, and you go home. You don't engage with the hospital administration tomorrow morning. You go in, you do your shift, you give nothing." "I know the protocol." I know you do. I'm saying it anyway. A pause. Hayes, still here. You been keeping records? She thought about the photographs on her phone, the time-stamped report PDFs in her email, the bagged note in her glove compartment. 11 months of careful, unremarkable documentation. Yeah, she said. I've been keeping records. The supervisor was walking back toward her now with the expression of someone about to say something nobody in the situation was going to believe. She put the phone in her pocket. The supervisor stopped in front of her and cleared his throat. Given the conflicting accounts tonight, he said, we're going to be filing this as an incident under review. Both parties will be, I need medical documentation of these injuries, Olivia said. Tonight, before anything else. The supervisor blinked. Of course, and I need the name and badge number of every officer who responded tonight. His jaw shifted slightly. That's standard information. You can, badge numbers tonight, written down. She pulled out a small notebook from her jacket pocket. She carried it the same way she'd carried one in the field, because field notes didn't lie even when everything else did. I'll write them down myself. Just read them to me. The supervisor stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he read them. She sat in the Harlow General ER 3 hours later. Not her own ER, not her own floor, because she wasn't going to be a patient and a staff member in the same building on the same night. She drove to Mercy North, 11 miles away, and checked in under her own name. The attending physician was a tired-looking woman in her late 30s who examined Olivia's throat, photographed the bruising at Olivia's request, and said nothing about how the bruising got there beyond what the charting required. Any difficulty swallowing? She asked. Some. Any loss of consciousness? No. Headache? Yes, moderate. The doctor finished her notes. She looked at Olivia over the chart for just a moment longer than clinical necessity required. Is there anything else you need tonight? She asked. Olivia thought about Derek Voss sitting up in that parking lot with the ease of a man who already knew how the story ended. She thought about Howard Belk and his flat palms and his careful language. She thought about Patrice Dunmore telling her that men like this got bored eventually. She thought about Marcus Webb's voice going still and specific the moment she said the word records. Not tonight, she said. She drove home at 1:15 in the morning. Her mother had left 2 voicemails she didn't listen to yet. She changed out of her scrubs, made tea she didn't drink, and sat at her kitchen table in the quiet of it. On her laptop, she opened a folder she'd been building since month 2. Dates, names, times, incident descriptions, photos, copies of every report she'd filed, including the administration's non-responses, which were themselves a kind of document. She opened a new file and began adding tonight. She typed without stopping for 40 minutes. When she was done, she sent a compressed folder to Marcus Webb's encrypted email, which he'd given her during their call with the casual efficiency of someone who sent and received these things regularly. Then she sent it to one other address, a woman named Sergeant Dana Fry, retired military police, now working as a paralegal at a civil rights law firm in the capital. Olivia had stitched up Dana's left forearm at FOB Salerno in 2019, and Dana had looked at her in the aftermath and said, "You're the kind of person I want to owe a favor to. Time to collect." She closed the laptop. Outside the kitchen window, Callaway Ridge was quiet in the way of a city that didn't know yet what was being set in motion inside a second-floor apartment near the river. Olivia sat with the quiet for exactly as long as she needed to. Then she went to bed. She had a shift at 7 a.m. She would be there at 6:47, the same as always, because the thing about what had been done to her, the harassment, the dismissal, the parking lot, all of it, was that it was designed to make her smaller, to make her disappear into resignation or silence or someone else's version of the story. She had been through worse than Derek Voss and come out the other side still functioning. What she had not been, in a very long time, was seen. That was changing now. 200 miles away in a state capitol office building, Marcus Webb forwarded her folder to 3 people she'd never met and typed a single line. This one needs to be clean. Start from the beginning. The 3 people Marcus Webb forwarded that folder to were not the kind of people who replied quickly. That was how Olivia knew they were serious. She'd dealt with fast replies before. Administrators who sent back 3 sentences in under a minute to demonstrate responsiveness without actually doing anything. What she'd learned, both in the military and in the 11 months since, was that the people who moved carefully moved once. The people who moved fast mostly moved in circles. She waited. She went to work at 6:47 a.m. the next morning. Her neck carried a bruise that had deepened overnight into something unmistakable. A dark gradient from purple to green along the left side of her throat that no turtleneck could have hidden even if she'd owned one. She wore her regular scrubs and her regular expression, and she said nothing about it when she walked past the nurse's station. Garrett noticed. He looked at her neck, looked at her face, and looked back at his chart. Sasha noticed. She started to say something, and Olivia shook her head very slightly, once. The shift ran the way shifts ran. A pair of kids from a youth soccer game, both with ankle injuries from a pile-up in the second half. A middle-aged man in full cardiac workup who kept insisting he was fine and just needed something for heartburn. A woman who'd taken a fall on the Riverwalk, hip contusion, probably no fracture but imaging to confirm. Normal emergencies. The kind that didn't require anything from Olivia beyond what she already knew how to give. Howard Belk appeared at 10:15. He walked to the ER floor with the energy of someone who'd been told to come down but hadn't been told what to say when he got there. He found Olivia near the imaging corridor and stopped a careful distance from her. Not close enough to be a conversation, but not far enough to pretend he didn't see the bruise. "I heard about last night," he said. "Okay. The incident in the parking area. Is that what we're calling it?" He adjusted his weight from one foot to the other. "Olivia, I want you to know that the hospital takes any allegations of—" "I'm not making allegations, Howard. I have a medical record from Mercy North documenting traumatic injury to my throat. I have a police incident report number. I have photographs. None of that is an allegation." Howard's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "Of course, and those will all be part of the review." "What review?" She looked at him directly. "The same review that's been in progress for the past 4 months? The one where nothing has been revoked and no one has been told to stop coming to this floor?" The imaging corridor was empty, but sound traveled in hospitals the way it traveled in barracks, farther than intended, absorbed into walls and remembered by whoever happened to be standing around the corner. "I would ask that we handle this in my office," Howard said, lower. "I'm on shift. Whatever you need to say to me, you can say it here." He didn't say it there. He left, and the specific way he left, too quickly, without resolution, with his eyes on his phone before he'd even turned around, told her more than anything he could have said. She went back to her patient. The police department's official position arrived in the form of a phone call at 2:30 that afternoon to the cell number she'd given the responding officers. A detective named Ron Pauley. Unhurried voice, the kind that had been trained in ambiguity. "Ms. Hayes, I'm following up on last night's incident report." "Nurse Hayes," she said. "And I'd prefer to be addressed that way." A brief pause. "Of course, Nurse Hayes. We've completed our initial review of both statements." "And?" "Given the conflicting accounts, we're classifying this as a mutual altercation at this stage." She was standing in the break room. Through the small window, she could see the parking lot where she'd left her car, one row over from where it had happened. "A mutual altercation," she said. "Both parties both parties are reporting, I have documented injuries. Bruising consistent with manual strangulation, photographed and charted at Mercy North at 11:48 p.m. last night. Does Derek Voss have comparable documentation?" Pauley was quiet for exactly 1 beat too long. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the details of his—" "Detective Pauley," she kept her voice level, "I'm going to ask you something, and I'd like you to consider it before you answer. Are you aware that I filed 2 formal complaints against Derek Voss with hospital administration in the past 4 months? Are you aware that both were buried? Are you aware that he left a written note in my locker that I still have in a bag in my car?" Another pause. Longer. "I wasn't aware of the complaints." "Now you are. I'd like them formally added to this report. I'll make a note. I'd like more than a note. I'd like a case number and a name." She could hear him writing something, whether it was what she'd asked for or something else she couldn't tell. "I'll be in touch," he he said. She didn't believe him. But she recorded the time and his name and the substance of the call in her notebook the moment she hung up, because that was the point. Not trust, but record. The record existed whether Detective Pauly followed up or not. The record existed whether Howard Belk held his review or not. That was the thing about documentation that people who'd never needed it didn't understand. It wasn't for the people who already had power. It was a parallel world quietly built that ran underneath the official one. And eventually, if the documentation was thorough enough, the parallel world surfaced. The second escalation happened not to Olivia but to Sasha, which was worse. It was the following Tuesday. Olivia was on shift, Bay 4, when Garrett appeared in the doorway with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Not the polite discomfort of someone avoiding confrontation, but something more like genuine alarm. "Sasha's in the back hallway," he said. "You should go." She went. Sasha was standing near the supply closet at the end of the east corridor, arms crossed over her chest, and she had been crying recently enough that her eyes were still swollen at the corners. Cole, Derek's friend, the wiry one, was leaning against the opposite wall with a posture that was performing ease very loudly. Olivia stepped between them without making it dramatic. She didn't touch Cole, didn't raise her voice. She just occupied the space between them the way she'd occupied space in field situations where escalation wasn't the goal. "You need to go," she told Cole. He looked amused. "I'm not doing anything. You're in a staff access corridor without a patient visit reason. That's already a violation. The next step is security, and the step after that is me filing an incident report that includes your name, today's date, and a description of this specific scene." She paused. "Or you can leave now and I don't have to do any of that tonight." Cole stared at her, trying to find the angle, trying to find what she was performing. When he couldn't find it, because there was nothing to find, he pushed off the wall with a short exhale that was meant to sound like boredom. "Tell your girl to stay in her lane," he said as he walked. Olivia watched him go until he'd turned the corner. Then she turned to Sasha. "Are you hurt?" Sasha shook her head. Her arms were still crossed. "What did he say?" Sasha uncrossed her arms slowly. "He said Derek knows I talked to you. He said—" She stopped. "He said it would be better for me if I thought about who I was backing." Olivia stayed very still. "He said that to you?" "Yeah." Sasha's jaw was tight. "He said Derek knows people at the college. That it's not hard to—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Olivia said nothing for a moment. Outside the supply closet, somewhere down the east corridor, a monitor was alarming softly and then going quiet. "Did anyone else hear it?" Sasha hesitated. "Garrett was near the corner. I don't know if he heard." "Okay." Olivia made a decision. "I need you to write this down tonight. Exact words, as close as you remember. Date, time, location. Email it to yourself so there's a timestamp." "Olivia, I know." She looked at the younger woman and tried to find the right thing, which was not reassurance and not alarm. "I know it's scary. I know it feels like you're choosing a side against people who have more reach than you do. That's real. I'm not going to pretend it isn't." Sasha blinked. She'd been expecting something more certain, something cleaner. "Then what do I do?" "You decide what you can live with," Olivia said. "That's the only part that's actually yours." She went back to Bay 4. She finished her shift. She drove home in the dark and called Marcus Webb. "It's spreading," she said when he picked up. "Tell me." She told him about Sasha, about Cole in the corridor, about Detective Pauly and his mutual altercation. Webb listened without interrupting, which was something she'd always valued in him. He didn't perform engagement with sounds, he just actually engaged. "The Pauly thing is interesting," he said when she finished. "In what way?" "Ron Pauly was promoted 14 months ago. I've been looking at the department structure in Callaway Ridge. His division handles incident reports involving, let's call them sensitive parties. The other detective who could have caught your call has a very different record." Olivia processed that. So the routing wasn't random. The routing is never random in a place like that. The question is how deep it goes and how many people are actively coordinating versus just reading the room and acting accordingly. He paused. The people I sent your file to have been building a picture of Marcus Voss for about 8 months. Separate matter. Your situation intersects. 8 months, she said. What kind of picture? The kind that takes 8 months to build carefully. He didn't say more than that, and she didn't push, because Webb operated on the need-to-know architecture she'd been trained in too. What I need from you right now is patience and the continuation of exactly what you've been doing. Normal shifts, documentation. Don't do anything that looks like you're preparing for something. I've been doing that. I know. Keep doing it. A beat. Dana Fry got your file. I know. She hasn't responded. She responded to me. She's reviewing it. She says your documentation is better than most things she sees from trained investigators. Something in Olivia's chest released a fraction of an inch. Not pride. Something quieter than pride. Tell her I said hi, she said. Tell her yourself. She'll be calling you in the next 48 hours. Dana Fry called at 7:14 a.m. on a Thursday before Olivia's shift. Her voice hadn't changed much since FOB Salerno. Direct, economical, with a dry undercurrent that took a while to recognize as warmth. Hayes, Fry. Your documentation is very clean. I had time to practice. 11 months of it, yeah. Dana's keyboard clicked faintly in the background. I want to talk about the complaints you filed with administration, the ones they sat on. Okay. In the first complaint, you copied anyone outside Harlow General? No, I followed the internal process. Right. Which means the only people who knew about the complaint were inside the hospital, and within 2 days of that filing, you started experiencing more targeted harassment. Olivia hadn't arranged it in those terms in her own mind before. Hearing someone else lay it out was a different experience. You're saying someone in administration told him. I'm saying it would be worth understanding who in administration has a personal or financial relationship with the Voss family beyond the board connection. Dana paused. It would also be worth knowing whether Harlow General has received any significant donations, grants, or contracts from Voss Development in the past 2 years that aren't in the public filing. How do I find that? You don't, Dana said. I do. I'm telling you so you know why I'm asking you not to dig into it yourself right now. Any search from your IP, your devices, anything that looks like you're investigating the hospital while employed there. It creates problems. I understand. What I need from you is a signed statement, full account, everything in your documentation, in narrative form. I'll use it to support a formal complaint to the State Medical Board regarding Harlow General's administrative conduct, which goes through different channels than the police. Dana's keyboard clicked again. And I'm going to be honest with you about the timeline. This is not going to be fast. I'm not in a hurry. You might get in a hurry, Dana said. Things are going to get harder before they get easier. Marcus Voss is not the kind of person who waits for the other side to make a move. Olivia looked out her kitchen window at the gray November morning. The river was still high. The flood barriers were still up along the east side of downtown. Fry, she said. What was the separate matter? The one Webb's contacts have been working on for 8 months. A pause. Just long enough to be deliberate. That's not mine to tell, Dana said. But when it comes out, and it's going to come out, you're going to want to have been standing where you're standing. Not closer, not involved. Just standing there with clean hands and good records. What does that mean? It means don't do anything heroic, Dana said. This isn't a situation where you need to be a hero. You need to be a witness, a very well-documented, legally represented, credible witness. Olivia thought about the parking lot. The forearm across her throat. Derek's flat voice saying, "Say you're nothing." Okay, she said. She meant it, mostly. Bad. The termination letter arrived on a Friday. Not a conversation. Not a meeting in Howard Belk's office with its flat-palm theatrical neutrality. A letter, printed on Harlow General letterhead, slipped under her apartment door sometime between 8 p.m. on Thursday and 7 a.m. on Friday, which meant someone had her home address and had used it. She read it standing in her hallway in socks. The language was careful. Restructuring of emergency department staffing requirements, elimination of redundant clinical positions, severance package in accordance with employee handbook. Section 12.3. No mention of Derek Voss, no mention of her complaints, no mention of anything that could be challenged as retaliatory on its face. The effective date was 2 weeks from today. She read it twice. Then she photographed it, emailed the photo to Dana Fry and Marcus Webb with a one-line note: termination letter, home delivered, no advance notice. She filed it in the folder on her laptop. She made coffee. She thought about what Dana had said. Don't do anything heroic. You need to be a witness. She called her mother. You sound different, her mother said. Different how? Like something happened. Something happened. Olivia sat at the kitchen table. They're trying to push me out. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone searching for words, but the silence of someone who'd expected this. What are you going to do? She asked. Olivia looked at the termination letter on the table. At the Harlow General letterhead, the controlled legal language, the 2-week clock. I'm going to go to work, she said. For 2 more weeks? For as long as I'm there. She picked up her coffee. They want me to leave quietly. They want this to be over. And you're not going to let it be over. Not until it actually is, Olivia said. Her mother made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one. You were like this when you were 7, she said. You fell off your bike in front of the neighbors, and you got up and rode to the end of the block before you cried. I remember. I don't know whether to be worried for you or not. Probably both, Olivia said. That seems accurate. She went to work Monday morning at 6:47. She clocked in. She picked up the first chart. At 11:20, she was charting at the nurses' station when she looked up and saw Derek Voss walk through the ER entrance with a visitor badge and a new cut of arrogance, the posture of someone who'd been told a problem was being resolved and had come to watch the resolution in person. He caught her eye across the floor. He smiled. It was the smile of someone who knew how the story was ending, who'd been told by his father and his lawyers and a police detective and a hospital administrator that the pieces were in place and the woman who'd caused all this noise would be gone in 2 weeks, and then the noise would stop. Olivia held his gaze for 1 full second. Then she looked back at her chart. She didn't see his smile change, but she heard him, an hour later, in the corridor near the break room, his voice carrying the careless confidence of someone who'd stopped monitoring volume, saying to someone on his phone, "Yeah, it's handled. She's done." She finished charting the admission notes. She did not allow herself the reaction she could feel building somewhere below her sternum. Not fear, not rage, but a third thing that had no clean name. The feeling of watching someone who doesn't know yet what's already moving toward them. At 4:47 p.m., she got a text from Marcus Webb. No greeting, no context. Just, "We found the other victims." She read the text 3 times. "We found the other victims." 5 words. No punctuation after the period. No context, no names, no number. Just that, and the timestamp, 4:47 p.m., and the particular quality of stillness that settled over her in the nurses' station like a change in atmospheric pressure. She knew better than to call Webb from the hospital floor. She finished the last 2 charts of her shift with the focused automaticity of someone whose hands knew the work well enough to keep moving while the rest of her was somewhere else entirely. She gave her hand off to the oncoming nurse, a quiet man named Trevor, who'd worked nights at Harlow General for 6 years and never seemed surprised by anything. She collected her bag and her jacket and walked to her car at 5:03 p.m. through the main lobby exit, not the rear medical training corridor, never that way again. She called Webb from the parking structure on the 3rd level, engine running, heat on, because November had sharpened overnight into something with actual teeth. He picked up before the 2nd ring. "How many?" she said. 7 confirmed so far, possibly more. Webb's voice carried the particular flatness of someone delivering information they've already processed emotionally and set aside. 4 women, 2 men, 1 non-binary person. Age range is 17 to 31, all in Callaway Ridge or within the county line, time frame going back 4 years. 4 years. Derek Voss would have been 18 when it started. What kind of incidents? The same architecture as yours. Physical intimidation, escalating harassment, property incidents, 1 assault that was documented and then quietly declassified as mutual. 2 of them tried to report formally. One to the police, one to a school administration. Both were redirected. Webb paused. One of them lost her job, worked at a Voss development subsidiary. Let go 3 days after she filed. Olivia looked at the concrete pillar in front of her car. Someone had stickered it at some point. A band name she didn't recognize. Half peeled now. Who found them? The contacts I forwarded your file to. They've been running a parallel track, different originating matter, but the victim profile kept intersecting. When your documentation came in, it gave them a through line. His keyboard made the faint clicking sound she'd come to associate with him working while talking. 3 of the 7 are willing to give formal statements. 2 more are considering it. The other 2 aren't there yet. The 2 who aren't there yet, are they in danger? Unclear. One has left the area. The other is still in Callaway Ridge, still employed near a Voss entity. She's being careful. Does she know about the others? Not yet. That's a sequencing decision that isn't mine to make alone. Another pause. Hayes, I need to tell you something, and I need you to sit with it before you react. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel slightly. Okay. The separate matter I mentioned, the 8 months of work by my contacts. It's not just corruption. It's not just the harassment pattern. He stopped for a moment. 3 years ago, a woman named Carla Reyes died in Callaway Ridge, ruled an accident. She was 24. She had filed a complaint against Derek Voss 6 weeks before she died. The car's heater was running. Olivia felt cold anyway. What kind of complaint? The same kind. Harassment, escalating, physical element, filed with the Callaway Ridge PD, handled by some, you already know whose division. Ron Pauly. Pauly was still a patrol officer in that period. His supervisor handled Reyes' complaint. That supervisor retired 18 months after her death with a very comfortable pension from a city contract that ran through a Voss development subsidiary. Webb's voice stayed level. The death investigation had gaps, the kind of gaps that are hard to create accidentally. Olivia sat in the car for a long time without speaking. This was the thing underneath the thing. This was what Dana Fry had been circling without naming. You're going to want to have been standing where you're standing, not closer, not involved. This was why the documentation mattered so much. This was why Webb had said 8 months with the weight of something that had been carried carefully for a very long time. Carla Reyes, she said. Yeah. She was 24. Yeah? Olivia thought about the parking lot behind the medical training wing, the forearm across her throat, the flat November dark and the dead security light, and the construction barriers that had redirected all the normal foot traffic away from that exact corner. She thought about how that had not been spontaneous. Webb, she said. The light above the rear exit was out, before the incident. I noted it as something to report in the morning, but I didn't report it before. I don't know when it went out. A silence. That's important, he said. I know. I need you to find out when it was last confirmed functional. Maintenance logs, if you can access them without triggering questions. If you can't access them without it looking deliberate. I'll figure out a way. She thought about it. The facility management system is accessible to senior nursing staff for incident report purposes. I can run a legitimate maintenance concern through it. Patient safety, complaint about inadequate exterior lighting near a staff exit. That's a reasonable report. It would pull the log as part of the response. Do it tomorrow. Normal shift timing, not first thing when you walk in. I know. Hayes. His voice shifted into something that wasn't quite personal, but was closer to it. You understand what this means if it's connected. It means the light didn't fail, she said. It means someone turned it off. She filed the patient safety concern at 10:40 the next morning, between a pediatric asthma case, and a laceration repair, which was exactly the kind of unremarkable administrative moment it needed to be. The system auto-generated a facilities review ticket and pulled the maintenance log for the exterior corridor lighting on the south and east elevations of the building. She read the log on her lunch break in the break room with her sandwich untouched beside her. The bulb above the rear medical training exit had been functional as of a scheduled inspection on November 9th. The next logged entry was a manual override of the fixture's circuit breaker, categorized as a temporary power management action, on November 21st. Olivia's assault had occurred on the evening of November 23rd. The manual override had been entered under a facilities staff login. She photographed the screen. She sent it to Webb and Dana Fry with 3 words. November 21st override. She ate half her sandwich. It tasted like nothing in particular. The pressure inside Harlow General changed that week, in ways she could feel but not fully map. Howard Belk stopped appearing on the ER floor, which should have been a relief and wasn't, because his absence felt like something being removed before demolition rather than a problem being resolved. 2 of the nursing administrators she'd had minor professional contact with over 11 months suddenly became elaborately busy when she was near the station, overly focused on screens, overly absorbed in conversations that didn't require absorption. The message was social and institutional at once. You are already gone. We are practicing the distance now. Garrett, to his credit, didn't do this. He also didn't do the opposite. Didn't make overtures of support. Didn't leave symbolic gestures. Didn't do anything that could be characterized as taking a side. He just kept working beside her the way he always had, occasionally passing her a chart without being asked, occasionally saying nice catch when she identified something subtle in a patient presentation. It was the most dignified response available to him, and she appreciated it without saying so. Sasha had written her statement and emailed it to herself, and then, 3 days later, forwarded it to Olivia at 11:30 at night with a message that just said, I decided what I could live with. Olivia had written back, thank you. She meant it more than she'd said. Dana Fry called on a Wednesday with the particular focused energy of someone who'd been building toward a specific moment. The state medical board complaint is filed, Dana said. That's now officially in the system. Harlow General Administration will receive notification within 5 to 7 business days. What does that trigger? For them? A formal response requirement and an initial audit of the relevant records, meaning your complaints, their responses, the timeline. They can't destroy anything now without obstruction exposure. Dana's voice had the clean precision of someone who'd been waiting for this particular lever. The filing also creates a parallel record that exists outside their internal system. Whatever they do to your personnel file, whatever story they construct, there's now an independent body with the original documentation. And my termination? The timing alone is legally problematic. Termination within 2 weeks of filing a formal harassment report against a donor family member delivered to your home address rather than through standard HR process. There's a retaliation framework there that my firm is prepared to pursue. A pause. I need to be honest with you. The civil track takes time. The medical board track takes time. The thing that could change the speed is the criminal track, and that's not ours to run. It's Webb's contacts. It's a federal matter at this point. The Carla Reyes thread. Dana stopped. I shouldn't be telling you the specifics. You're not telling me specifics. You're telling me it exists. It exists, Dana confirmed. And when it moves, it's going to move fast because that's how federal involvement works. You don't get a slow federal investigation. You get months of nothing, and then a door comes off its hinges. Olivia was in her car again. She'd started doing most of her calls from there, parked in varying locations because the apartment felt permeable in ways she couldn't quantify. How do I know when the door is about to come off? You won't, necessarily. That's the honest answer. Dana paused. But Webb will know before you do, and he'll tell you. What do I do between now and then? You work your last 2 weeks. You document anything that happens. You don't confront anyone, don't escalate, don't do anything that gives them cause to characterize you as unstable or aggressive. Another pause. And this one had something in it that was more human than legal. Something that recognized the cost of what it was asking. I know what I'm asking is hard. I've done hard, Olivia said. I know you have. And Dana said it simply, without the inflation people usually gave that kind of statement. Just said it and let it be true. On her second to last week at Harlow General, Derek Voss came back to the floor. Not alone this time. With a woman Olivia didn't recognize, late 40s, fitted blazer, the specific posture of someone whose job involved being the most composed person in a room. She was carrying a leather portfolio and walking half a step behind Derek, which was wrong. That posture was deferential, but there was nothing deferential about the way she was reading the room. Her eyes went to Olivia once and then away, with the controlled speed of someone who'd already been briefed on who she was and what she looked like. Olivia kept charting. They didn't approach her. They went to the nursing director's office, Patrice Dunmore's domain, and the door closed. Olivia could see it from the station, 40 feet down the corridor. She didn't let herself speculate. She charted the morning's cases, administered 2 medication rounds, helped with a sepsis protocol on a 60-year-old who'd come in looking like a bad cold and turned out to be crashing. All hands, high focus, the kind of case that required her to be entirely present and nowhere else. She was good at that. Always had been. The woman in the blazer left 45 minutes after arriving. Derek lingered in the doorway of Patrice's office for a moment, hands in his pockets, and looked down the floor toward the nurse's station with the expression of someone checking on an investment. He caught Olivia's eye again. She looked back at him steadily, the same way she'd looked at him the night in the parking lot. Not performing anything, just present, accounted for, not going anywhere. Something moved across his face that she filed away. Not quite uncertainty, but something that was trying to look like certainty and wasn't succeeding all the way. He left. Patrice Dunmore appeared at the nurse's station 20 minutes later. She stood beside Olivia's chair and spoke quietly, her back to the room. "The hospital's legal team is reviewing your termination," Patrice said. "I'm aware the medical board complaint was filed," Olivia said, without inflection. Patrice absorbed that. There's some consideration being given to restructuring the terms of the separation. "My attorney handles that communication." A brief pause. "You have an attorney?" "I do." Another pause, longer. Patrice had always struck Olivia as a person who'd learned to navigate institutional complexity by finding the line between opposing forces and standing precisely on it. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't corrupt in the way Howard Belk was corrupt. She was the thing that was in some ways harder to reckon with, a person who saw clearly and chose safety anyway. "Olivia," she said, and the first name had something in it that wasn't quite an apology. "For what it's worth, Patrice." Olivia turned and looked at her directly. "I know what it's worth." Patrice nodded. She went back to her office. The phone call from Webb came at 6:20 a.m. on a Tuesday, before her shift. She was in the kitchen with coffee when it rang, and the number was his, but it rang once, stopped, and then rang again immediately. The prearranged signal she'd almost forgotten they'd established in their second call, back when everything had felt more procedural than urgent. 2 rings interrupted means it's moving. She picked up. "Today," Webb said. One word. Her stomach went tight. "Today what?" "Federal agents are executing warrants this morning. Multiple locations. The Voss Development main office, Marcus Voss's residence, 2 properties associated with the shell companies." He was speaking with the clipped efficiency of someone reading from a mental checklist. "Callaway Ridge PD Internal Affairs is also moving on 3 officers, including the supervisor who handled your case." Olivia set down her coffee mug. Her hands were entirely steady. She noticed that and found it strange, and then recognized it as the same steadiness that showed up when a trauma case rolled in. Not the absence of response, but the compression of it into something usable. "Carla Reyes," she said, "is part of the warrant." "Yes." The kitchen was quiet around her. Morning light through the window. The river somewhere to the east, still running high from the November rains. "What do I do right now?" "Do not go to work today." She paused. "I have a shift." "Call in sick. It's not about your safety, it's about optics. When this breaks publicly, and it's going to break today because these kinds of actions don't stay quiet, you should not be inside Harlow General when it happens. You should be somewhere neutral, somewhere documented." He paused. "Dana's firm is sending someone to your address at 8:30, a paralegal named Kim Hargrove. She's going to go through the full documentation with you and prep a formal witness statement for federal investigators. Don't talk to anyone else until she gets there." "What about the hospital staff? Garrett, Sasha?" "They're not in any danger. This is moving on the Voss family and the police division, not the hospital yet. The hospital administrative action is a separate proceeding that follows after." He paused. "Hayes, this is the part where you stop managing it and let it be managed, okay?" She thought about 11 months of charting, of reports filed and buried, of a note in a locker that she'd kept in a plastic bag in her glove compartment, of Sasha's face in that corridor and the word nothing pressed against her throat in a parking lot in the dark. Yeah, she said. She called in sick. She'd used exactly 2 sick days in 11 months. Kim Hargrove arrived at 8:28, 2 minutes early, with a laptop bag and a cardboard coffee carrier with 2 cups, which was such a straightforwardly human thing to do that Olivia stood in her doorway for a half second before stepping back to let her in. Dana said you take it black, Kim said. She's right. They sat at the kitchen table and worked for 2 hours. Kim was meticulous and unhurried and had a way of asking questions that created space for complex answers without performing patience about it. She just listened, typed, asked the next thing. By 10:45, they had a 40-page document that Olivia read back to herself and recognized as the truest sequential account of the past year that she'd yet produced. She signed it. Kim left. Olivia sat at the kitchen table with the second half of her coffee, which had gone cold. She drank it anyway. At 11:17, her phone began to receive news alerts. Federal agents execute search warrants at Voss development offices in Callaway Ridge. Marcus Voss, prominent Callaway Ridge developer, subject of federal investigation. Multiple Callaway Ridge PD officers placed on administrative leave pending internal affairs review. She read them in sequence. She didn't feel what she expected to feel, which was, she wasn't sure what she'd expected. Something more like release, maybe. What she felt instead was quieter than that, like a held breath being let out so slowly that you only noticed it was happening when you reached the bottom of it. Her phone rang. Not Webb. Her mother. It's on the news, her mother said. I know. Are you okay? Olivia thought about the honest answer to that, which was complicated and multivalent and also unnecessary. Yeah, she said. You're sure? I'm sure. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Come for dinner this week. I will. Bama. The reaction inside Callaway Ridge moved in stages that Olivia watched from outside the hospital for the first time in 11 months. The first stage was the news cycle, which lasted approximately 48 hours and generated the specific kind of media attention that attached itself to wealthy family downfall stories. Helicopter footage of the Voss development building, file photos of Marcus Voss at civic events, the careful language of reporters who'd been legally advised about what they could assert before charges were formally filed. The second stage was the institutional scramble. Harlow General's board convened an emergency session. Olivia knew this because Dana Fry told her, and because Howard Belk's name appeared in an internal memo that someone, she didn't ask who, forwarded to Dana's office, indicating that Belk had been placed on administrative leave pending review of administrative decisions related to employee complaint handling protocols over the preceding fiscal year. The language was so constructed as to be almost architectural, every load-bearing word chosen to distribute liability as widely as possible. The third stage was the call from federal investigators. 2 of them. A woman named Special Agent Torres and a man named Special Agent Rusk from a field office 2 hours north. They came to the paralegal firm's offices, not to Olivia's apartment, which had been Dana's deliberate choice of territory. Olivia sat across from them at a conference room table on a Thursday afternoon with Dana beside her and Kim Hargrove at the end of the table with a recorder and a legal pad. Torres led. She had the quality of attention that Olivia associated with people who'd been trained to find inconsistencies, not aggressive, but precise in a way that left no comfortable vagueness. We appreciate you coming in, Torres said. Thank you for including me, Olivia said. It was a formal exchange and both of them knew it. But Torres looked at her for a moment with something that was marginally more than professional. A flicker of something that acknowledged what it actually meant to sit across this table and what it had cost to get there. Then the questions started. They were thorough and they were sequential and they covered every document Olivia had produced over 11 months, every date, every specific exchange. Torres asked the same question from 3 different angles at 2 different points in the interview. Checking for inconsistency, Olivia knew, which was correct procedure and which she didn't mind because her answers were the same from every angle. Rusk asked mostly follow-up questions. He was less practiced at concealing what interested him And what interested him most was the maintenance log. The November 21st circuit override, he said. You accessed that log through a patient safety report. A legitimate patient safety report, yes. Inadequate exterior lighting at a staff exit is a genuine safety concern. We're not questioning the legitimacy, he said. We're interested in who entered the override and whether that person had any relationship to the Voss family. I can tell you the login ID I saw. I photographed it. We have the photograph. He glanced at Torres. We're following that thread. Torres moved on to Carla Reyes. The questions in this section were more careful, more slowly paced, and Olivia understood why. This was the center of the federal interest, the thread that had been building for 8 months, and anything she said here had to be precise because it existed at the intersection of what she'd witnessed and what had been constructed before she arrived. She told them what Webb had told her. She told them she'd had no independent knowledge of Reyes before Webb disclosed it. She told them the moment in the parking lot, the barriers, the dead light, the calculated isolation, had felt intentional to her before she knew about Reyes because she'd been trained to read tactical preparation. Torres made a note. What made you preserve evidence from the beginning? Torres asked. Before you knew any of this was going to become a federal matter. Olivia thought about it honestly. Because I'd seen what happened when people didn't. In the military? In the military and since. She paused. Documentation is the only thing that stays true when everything else gets revised. Torres looked at her for a moment. How many formal complaints did you file before you sought outside help? 2. Both internal, both buried. And you sought outside help from a former military contact? Yes. Why not a lawyer first? Because I needed someone who could see the architecture before I knew what I was looking at, Olivia said. Dana is a brilliant attorney, but what I needed first was someone who could tell me whether what I was seeing was real or whether I was making it larger than it was. Marcus Webb could do that. Torres wrote something. Rusk wrote something. Is there anything you want to add, Torres said, that we haven't asked about? Olivia considered for a moment. Sasha Reyes. Torres's pen paused. Not related to Carla Reyes, Olivia said quickly. Different person, same last name. A nursing student volunteer at Harlow General. She was directly threatened by Derek Voss's associate. She's written a statement. She's willing to cooperate, but she's 19 years old and she's scared. Olivia looked at Torres directly. She did the right thing in a situation where the institutional incentives were entirely against it. I'd ask that she be treated accordingly. Torres nodded once. Noted. Pass. The collapse of the institutional protection around Derek Voss didn't happen in a single moment. It happened the way structural failures actually happened. Not a clean break, but a progressive load-bearing failure that had been building for longer than anyone admitted, until one element gave way and then the redistribution of weight took the rest. Marcus Voss was formally charged on a Thursday. Conspiracy to obstruct justice, bribery of public officials, and a homicide-related charge connected to Carla Reyes' death that the prosecutor's office had spent 8 months building into something they were prepared to take to a jury. He was arraigned and released on a bail amount that his attorneys arranged and that the news reported with the breathless precision reserved for large numbers. His lawyer issued a statement calling it a politically motivated prosecution. Olivia read the statement on her phone in her car and thought about what it meant that this was their best response. Not denial, but political reframing. The denial would have required a counter-narrative. They apparently didn't have one. Derek's case moved through a separate track because he was 22, which placed him firmly in adult criminal jurisdiction regardless of the timeline of the original behaviors. The assault charge, Olivia's parking lot, documented, photographed, medically recorded, corroborated by the maintenance log, was the proximate charge. But the parallel victim statements that had been accumulating for 4 years were now part of a pattern of conduct presentation that Dana's office was coordinating with the prosecution. 6 of the 7 other victims had now formally cooperated. The 7th, the woman still employed near a Voss entity, had called Dana's firm on a Wednesday morning and said, in a voice that Dana described as the calmest and most exhausted voice she'd ever heard in 20 years of law, "I'm ready." Olivia's termination from Harlow General was formally rescinded 18 days after she'd been handed the letter. The call came from a hospital attorney, not from Howard Belk or Patrice Dunmore, which was itself a kind of information. The attorney spoke in the language of institutional liability management, and every sentence was technically about process and procedure, but the underlying message was unmistakable. Harlow General wanted her back on terms that wouldn't add to their current legal exposure. She listened to the full statement before speaking. "I appreciate the call," she said. "I'll have my attorney respond." "Of course," the attorney said. "We hope to—" "I'll have my attorney respond," she said again, and ended the call. Dana's response to the hospital took 2 days to draft and arrived in the form of a letter that Olivia read twice at the kitchen table. It was 12 pages long. It was extraordinarily precise. It included the phrase "full public vindication" in a section that outlined conditions for any reinstatement discussion, and it was the first time Olivia had seen those words applied to her situation in any official document. She put the letter down on the table. Outside the kitchen window, Callaway Ridge had finally turned into actual winter, the first real snow of the season coming down in the early morning in the small, serious way of snow that intends to stay. The river was still high. The flood barriers were still up on the east side of downtown, though the construction equipment had long since moved. Her phone buzzed. Webb. Paulie resigned this morning. 2 others from his division expected to follow. And then, 30 seconds later, a second message from a number she didn't recognize, which resolved itself when she opened it. "This is Carla Rhea's sister. My name is Rosa. Donna gave me your number. I hope that's okay. I wanted you to know that what you did, keeping those records, not walking away, it's going to matter for my family in ways I can't explain yet. I just wanted to say that. You don't have to respond." Olivia read the message 3 times. She sat with it for a long time. She started typing a response and stopped. Started again. What she wanted to say was complicated and insufficient and probably beside the point because Rosa Reyes hadn't written to get something back. She'd written to give something, and the right response to that was to receive it without diminishing it. She typed, "I'm glad it mattered. I'm so sorry about your sister." She sent it. She sat at the kitchen table with the snow coming down outside and the coffee getting cold again, and the city around her in the slow, stunned process of reckoning with what had been living inside it for 4 years without sufficient resistance. Then her phone rang. Dana Fry. On a Saturday morning before 9, which meant something had broken. "Olivia." Dana's voice was stripped of its professional architecture entirely, which in itself was alarming. "Are you home?" "Yes. What happened?" A pause that lasted long enough to be its own kind of answer. "There was an incident last night," Dana said. "Late, around midnight." Another pause. "Derek Voss went to the home of one of the other victims, the one who came forward last, the woman near the Voss entity. Her name is Mara." Olivia was already standing. "Is she—" "She's alive. She's at Mercy North." Dana's voice was very controlled in the way voices became controlled when the person inside them was working against something. "It's bad, Olivia. She's in serious condition." The kitchen was very still. "He was out on bail," Olivia said. "He was out on bail." The snow kept falling outside the window, small and serious and not going anywhere. "The federal prosecutor's office is being notified," Dana said. "This changes the bail situation. This changes a lot of things." She stopped. "I needed you to hear it from me before you saw it on the news." Olivia looked at the window, at the snow. "How bad is serious condition?" she said. Dana told her. Olivia closed her eyes. Mara Solano had 2 broken ribs, a fractured orbital socket, and a grade 3 concussion. Olivia knew the clinical breakdown because Dana had said it out loud, and Olivia's brain had filed it the way it filed all medical information. Organized, specific, without the buffer of euphemism. She'd treated worse in the field. She'd treated worse in the Harlow General ER on unremarkable Tuesday nights. The knowing what it meant was the thing that didn't get easier with experience. The knowing what it felt like from the inside of it. She drove to Mercy North. She didn't call Dana back first. Didn't call Webb. She got in her car in the Saturday morning snow and drove the 11 miles on roads that were still mostly clear because the snowplows ran early in Callaway Ridge, and she parked in the visitor structure and walked into Mercy North's lobby and went to the information desk. "I'm here for Mara Solano," she said. "I'm a nurse. I know her through... She stopped. The language was complicated. She's a victim in an ongoing case. I've been working with her attorney, Dana Fry's office. The desk attendant looked at her with the careful neutrality of someone trained to neither confirm nor deny. Are you family? No? Then I can't... I know. Olivia didn't push. She stepped back from the desk and called Dana. She has a sister, Dana said when she picked up. Younger. Her name is Priya. She's there. Tell the desk Priya Solano is expecting you. I'll call her right now. 3 minutes later, Olivia was in an elevator going to the 4th floor. Priya Solano was 26 and had clearly been crying for several hours in the specific way that left a person looking scraped out, red-rimmed eyes, a stillness in the face that came after the active grief had run through and left the ground bare behind it. She was sitting in a chair outside a closed room at the end of the corridor, and she stood up when she saw Olivia coming, which meant Dana had described her. "You're Hayes," Priya said. "Yes." Priya looked at her for a moment, not sizing her up exactly, but doing something more like confirmation, matching the person to whatever she'd been told. "She's stable," Priya said. "They upgraded her an hour ago, from serious to stable." Olivia felt something decompress in her chest. That's good. That's the right direction. She has a concussion, and they're watching for swelling. The ribs... Priya's voice broke on the word and she stopped, pressed her lips together, kept going. The ribs are manageable, that's what they said. Manageable. Olivia sat down in the chair beside her, and they stayed like that for a moment without speaking, which was sometimes the right thing, the absence of words as its own form of presence. "She was so scared to come forward," Priya said quietly. "I kept telling her, the people you're working with, they're serious. They know what they're doing." She kept saying she knew, but she could still feel him out there, like it wasn't real yet. She stopped again. And then she did it anyway. She called the attorney anyway. "She did the hardest thing," Olivia said. "And then he..." Priya didn't finish the sentence. "He made a catastrophic mistake," Olivia said. And she meant it clinically, the way she'd mean it tactically, because what Derek Voss had done last night was not the action of someone managing a legal situation. It was the action of someone in freefall who'd stopped thinking about outcomes. Men who still had viable options didn't do what he'd done. Men who did what he had done had already calculated, consciously or not, that the options were gone. It didn't make it less of a crime. It made it additionally a confession. "The bail is being revoked today," Olivia said. "Dana will confirm, but that's certain." Priya looked at her. "How certain?" "He violated the conditions of bail by contacting a witness in an active federal case. That's not a gray area. He'll be in custody before tonight." Priya's jaw worked. She nodded. "Can I do anything?" Olivia said. "While you're here, coffee, food." "I know that sounds like nothing." "It doesn't sound like nothing." Priya looked down at her hands. "It sounds like the only thing anyone can actually do." Olivia got them both coffee from the floor vending machine. It was bad coffee, thin and slightly burnt, and they drank it in the plastic chairs outside Mara Solano's room while the snow kept coming down on the other side of the window at the end of the corridor, and the morning shifted from early to middle without marking the change. Derek Voss was taken into custody at 2:14 p.m. that Saturday. Olivia was still at Mercy North when Webb texted her. She read it standing in the corridor and felt nothing she could easily name, not satisfaction, which would have felt wrong given where she was standing and why. Something flatter than satisfaction. The specific flatness of a thing that needed to happen, happening. The news broke at 3 p.m., with the particular velocity of a story that had been building pressure for weeks, and finally had a release point. The attack on Mara Solano, whose name the media used after her family confirmed they didn't want anonymity, a decision Olivia respected without needing to understand it, transformed the narrative from a corruption investigation into something more visceral and undeniable. Journalists who'd been carefully navigating the legal landscape of what they could report about Marcus Voss's charges now had a concrete, recent, photographically documented incident of violence against a cooperating witness in an active federal case, and the restraint came off. By 6 p.m. that evening, the name Voss had become shorthand for something specific in Callaway Ridge. The particular kind of institutional rot that hides behind philanthropy. The particular kind of damage that gets called complicated when it should just be called what it is. Marcus Voss's attorney issued a second statement. It was shorter than the first and contained the phrase, "My client had no knowledge of and does not condone," and then a series of words that were individually precise and collectively meaningless. Olivia didn't read it all the way through. She drove home at 7 p.m. She ate leftover rice and the last of the vegetables in her refrigerator and thought about what she needed to do on Monday, which was call Dana and walk through what the attack on Mara meant for the timeline of her own case and for the 7 other victim statements and for the broader prosecution sequence. There was still a significant amount of work to do, and she was better at doing work than she was at sitting with what couldn't be worked on yet. She slept for 6 hours, which was more than she expected. The public hearing was Dana's idea and the prosecutor's office's mechanism. It wasn't a trial. Trials were their own timeline, measured in months and procedural filings and continuances. This was a formal victim impact panel convened as part of the federal sentencing pre-process for Marcus Voss's conspiracy and obstruction charges, which had been expedited with the cooperation of the multiple federal agencies that had spent 8 months building the case and were now prepared to move it forward at a pace that left no room for the dilatory legal strategies that money typically purchased. Dana explained the distinction to Olivia over the phone on a Sunday afternoon. "It's not testimony in the trial sense," Dana said. "It's formal public record, video. Everything said there becomes part of the evidentiary record that the sentencing judge reviews. And it's open. Press can attend, public can attend, the defendants and their attorneys are present. Is that normal? For a case this size, with this level of federal interest and this many affected parties? Yes. It also serves a function that the prosecutor is very aware of." Dana paused. "When you have 7 years of suppressed complaints and buried evidence and a complicit institutional structure, the hearing is where that gets said out loud, on camera, in front of the people who built the suppression. There's a reason it's public." "When?" 3 weeks from Thursday. 3 weeks was both too short and not short enough, which meant it was probably right. "Will Mara be there?" Olivia asked. "She wants to be. Her doctors are cautiously supportive. Her ribs are healing faster than projected. She's stubborn, apparently." Despite everything, Olivia almost smiled. "Who else?" "All 7 who cooperated, Sasha, 2 former hospital employees who reached out after the news broke, both of whom had complaints buried by Howard Belk over the past 3 years. Dana's voice carried the controlled precision of someone reading from a list that had been getting longer. "Rosa Reyes has asked to speak on behalf of her sister. The prosecutor's office is treating that as a central element of the Carla Reyes homicide-related charge." The room was quiet around Olivia. She was at her kitchen table again, the same spot where she'd read the termination letter, where she'd eaten cold toast and typed field notes at 1 in the morning, where the second cup of coffee always sat untouched and cooling because she made it for the idea of a second cup more than the actual need. "Dana," she said, "Howard Belk. Lost his position. The board terminated him 2 days ago. He's retained a criminal defense attorney, which tells you what he's been advised about his exposure." "And Patrice Dunmore?" A pause. "Patrice cooperated with the medical board investigation voluntarily. She provided documentation of the internal pressure she received regarding your complaints. There are no criminal charges against her at this time." Olivia thought about Patrice in the imaging corridor, saying for what it's worth and stopping when she got to the limit of what she was willing to put words to. It wasn't exoneration. It wasn't nothing either. "I'm not going to tell you how to feel about that," Dana said. "I know." Olivia was quiet for a moment. "What about Garrett? The staff? Anyone getting pulled into this who shouldn't be?" "No. The medical board's administrative action is specific to policy-level decisions and supervisory conduct. Frontline staff are outside its scope." She nodded, even though Dana couldn't see it. The people who'd kept their heads down and done their jobs in the middle of a corrupt system weren't the same as the people who'd built and maintained the corruption. That distinction mattered. 2 days before the hearing, a woman Olivia had never heard of called her on a number she didn't recognize. The woman's name was Claire Alderman. She was a journalist, a real one. the kind that still existed in the contracting space between local and national media, attached to a regional outlet that had been covering the Voss investigation from the beginning with the methodical persistence that the story deserved. She'd gotten Olivia's number from a source she declined to name, and she spent the first 90 seconds of the call explaining clearly what she was writing, and what she was asking for. "I'm not doing a victim profile," Claire said. "I want to write about the documentation, about what it meant that you kept records from month 2 when there was no reason to think they'd ever matter in a legal proceeding. I want to write about how that's the piece that made everything else possible." Olivia leaned against her kitchen counter. "The federal investigation made everything possible. My records were one component. Your records were the through line. Every legal and investigative team I've talked to has said the same thing." Claire's voice was direct without being aggressive. "You can decline, I understand if you do, but I think the story of how a person decides to document their own experience in the absence of institutional support, and what that makes possible downstream, I think that's worth telling." Olivia was quiet for a moment. "Why now?" she said. 2 days before the hearing. "Because after the hearing, the story becomes about verdicts and sentencing, which matters. But what I want to write about is the part that happens before that, the 11 months before that." A pause. "I'd like to talk to you for an hour. If something I write is inaccurate, you can tell me and I'll correct it before publication." It was a reasonable offer, the kind of offer that only worked if the person making it actually meant it, and Olivia had been reading people in high-stakes situations long enough to know that Claire Alderman meant it. "1 hour," she said. "This week, before Thursday." "Wednesday morning?" "Wednesday morning." Claire Alderman arrived at 9 a.m. on Wednesday with a recorder and a notebook, the same dual-record approach Olivia had used herself, which was either coincidence or professional habit, or both. She was in her mid-30s, had the slightly compressed energy of someone running on a deadline they hadn't mentioned, and asked questions the way good listeners ask questions, specifically enough to require a real answer, open enough to allow one. They talked for 90 minutes. Olivia said more than she expected, not because Claire pushed her to, but because some of it had been waiting for a context where it fit, and the question of why did you start documenting was a context where certain things finally fit. "I'd seen people who didn't," Olivia said, "in the military and after, people who lived the experience fully and completely, and then when they tried to describe it, they only had the experience. They didn't have the record. And the institution always has the record. The institution always has the paper trail, the official version, the documentation that says what the institution decided happened. If you don't have your own record, you're arguing your memory against their paper." She paused. "That's not a fight you win." Claire wrote something. "Did you think your records would be used this way? In a federal investigation?" "No," Olivia said honestly. "I thought they'd support an employment complaint or a civil case. I didn't think they'd contribute to a homicide prosecution." She looked at the window. "I thought about Carla Reyes for a long time after Webb told me. I thought about whether I could have gotten there sooner, whether if I'd made different choices earlier. Could you have?" She thought about it without performing humility. "Maybe I could have escalated faster. Maybe I was too patient with the internal process too long." She was quiet. "But I also know that moving before the records were solid would have given them the opportunity to characterize me as erratic. Sometimes the slow way is the only way that holds." Claire looked at her steadily. "Is that something you believe? Or something you're telling yourself?" Olivia met her eyes. "Both," she said. "It's usually both." Thursday morning came with the particular quality of significance that Olivia distrusted on principle, because she'd learned that important things rarely felt important in the moment, and significant feelings were mostly the brain performing a story about itself. She drove to the Civic Center building where the hearing was being held. Parked 2 blocks away because the main lot was already full. News vans had been there since 7. She'd seen them on the traffic camera feed that Claire had forwarded her as a practical heads-up. She was wearing her own clothes, not scrubs. Dark slacks, a gray button-down, the kind of assembled simplicity that was less about appearance than about not being distracted by what she was wearing. Dana had asked if she wanted anything specific for the day, and Olivia had said clean, and that had been the end of the conversation. Dana was outside the building's main entrance when Olivia arrived, Beside her was Kim Hargrove, and beside her was a man Olivia had never met in person, but recognized immediately from the specific quality of stillness he occupied. Marcus Webb, 50 yards away, in a charcoal jacket, watching the street. He turned when she was 20 feet away. He looked older than she'd expected, which was its own form of information. She'd known him at 33, when he was still field-attached and built for it, and the 14 years since had layered something different over that. Not diminished. Settled. "Hayes," he said. Webb. They didn't hug. They shook hands, which was the right register for what they were to each other. People who trusted each other completely and had never been close in any social sense of the word. "You look good," he said. "You look tired." He almost smiled. 8 months. "I know." Dana moved them inside before the moment could become something it didn't need to be. The hearing room held 200 people and was already most of the way full. Press pool in the designated area on the left side. Legal teams arranged at specific tables. A raised panel of 5 people at the front, federal and state officials. A representative from the medical board. A victim's advocate from the prosecutor's office. Marcus Voss was already at one of the defendant tables with 3 attorneys, and Olivia made herself look at him directly when she came in, not because she wanted to and not to make a point, but because looking away from difficult things had never been something she'd been able to afford. He was older looking too. The coverage photos had been from civic events where he'd worn philanthropy like a garment, the easy confidence of someone certain of his own narrative. What was sitting at that table was a different thing, not humbled exactly, recalculated. His attorney leaned over and said something in his ear when Olivia entered. Marcus Voss didn't look at her. Derek's table was empty. He was in custody. That was its own visual. Olivia found her seat. Dana sat beside her. Across the room, she could see Sasha, who looked nervous in the way Olivia recognized as a specific kind of courage, not the absence of fear, but the decision to move through it anyway. Beside Sasha was a woman Olivia had never met, who had the particular stillness of someone Mara Solano might have looked like before, composed, watching the room, saving what she had for when she needed it. She looked more closely. The woman was in a wheelchair. Her left arm was in a soft brace, and there was a healing bruise along the left side of her jaw that the lighting in the room caught at a specific angle. Mara Solano. She'd come. Olivia looked at her for a moment. The fact of her being there 3 weeks after what Derek had done to her, in this room, in this seat, watching the panel take their places at the front of the room with the expression of someone who had decided exactly how much of herself she was going to give to this moment and was prepared to give it. The chair of the panel called the room to order. The hearing began. The first hour was procedural, and Olivia expected that. The formal reading of charges, the confirmation of evidentiary record, the orientation of each participant in the legal framework of the proceeding. She'd been through enough formal processes to know that the architecture of them required this before anything real could happen, the same way a building required framing before walls. The victim statements started at 10:20. They came in chronological order of the original incidents, which meant the first speaker was a 31-year-old former employee of a Voss Development subsidiary named James Kowalski, who had filed a harassment complaint 6 years ago and been let go within a month. He spoke for 9 minutes. His voice was even throughout, except for 2 sentences in the middle, and when it broke on those sentences, he stopped, breathed, and kept going. No one in the room looked away. The statements continued, each one different in specifics and identical in architecture. The approach, the dismissal, the institutional machinery that converted a person's experience into an inconvenience and then into a problem and then into a silence. Each speaker had lived inside a version of the same structure, and each had tried at some point to fight it through legitimate channels and found the channels closed. Rosa Reyes spoke at 11:15. She was 28. She looked like someone who'd been carrying something heavy for 3 years and had learned to carry it with good posture because the alternative was to be defined by the weight. She talked about her sister for 7 minutes, not the death, the living. Carla at 22, Carla studying for her paralegal certification, Carla calling Rosa from the parking lot of the Callaway Ridge Police Department the day she filed her complaint, saying, "I did it, Rosie, I actually did it." The pride in her voice that day. The belief that the process would work. The room was completely still. Rosa said, "My sister believed that the right thing to do was what protected you. She believed that. She did everything right. And the people who were supposed to protect her used their positions to protect the people who hurt her instead." She paused. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she said. "I'm here because my sister's name deserves to be said in a room where the people responsible are sitting and listening. Carla Reyes. That's her name. She was 24 years old and she was doing everything right." Olivia kept her face still. She was next. She walked to the speaker's position at 11:32 and put her hands flat on the table, an old habit, a grounding technique she'd learned in the field, and looked at the panel and then at the room. She did not look at Marcus Voss. She spoke for 12 minutes. She spoke in the same register she'd maintained throughout: factual, sequential, specific. She named every date and every name and every buried report. She described the parking lot in November detail: the dead light, the construction barriers, the forearm across her throat, and the specific words that had been said to her. She described filing the police report and the supervisor's expression and Detective Pauly's language and the meaning of a mutual altercation when one party had documented traumatic injury to her throat and the other had documentation of nothing. She described Sasha in the corridor. She described the termination letter delivered to her home address. She described driving to Mercy North alone in the dark to have her injuries documented because she had enough experience with institutions to know she couldn't leave that to chance. She described Rosa Reyes's text message on a Saturday morning in the snow. "I just wanted to say that. You don't have to respond." When she finished, she looked at the panel. Then, because the decision arrived in the moment and felt correct, she turned and looked at Marcus Voss directly. He was looking at his hands. She returned to her seat. Dana put a hand briefly on her forearm and then removed it, which was exactly the right amount. The cross-examination period began at 1:45 after a lunch recess that Olivia used to sit outside on a concrete bench in the cold and eat half a sandwich she'd brought, not think about anything specifically, which was a skill she'd worked at. Marcus Voss's lead attorney was a man named Raymond Gould. He was 61, silver-haired, and had the composed aggression of someone who'd spent 4 decades being the most expensive person in a room and finding it effective. He'd been quiet through the morning. Olivia had watched him watching the statements with the stillness of someone building a sequence of responses. He began with James Kowalski, which was tactical, the oldest incident, the most temporally distant, the most room for ambiguity. He asked 4 questions in careful succession, and each one was designed to introduce a sliver of uncertainty into the account without directly attacking the speaker's credibility. Then he moved to Olivia. "Ms. Hayes," he began. "Nurse Hayes," she said. He absorbed this without visible reaction. "Nurse Hayes, you've described a series of incidents beginning in your first weeks at Harlow General, culminating in an alleged assault in November." "Documented assault," she said. "Medically recorded that evening." "You drove yourself to a different hospital after this assault?" "Yes." He changed angles. "You have a military background?" "Yes." "Combat deployments?" "Yes." "You've received training in hand-to-hand defensive techniques?" "As have most combat deployed service members." "And on the evening of this incident, you were alone with my client's son in an isolated area of the hospital property?" Olivia looked at him steadily. The room had the specific quality of silence that meant everyone in it understood what was being constructed. "Your client's son approached me from behind in a poorly lit area that had its circuit breaker manually overridden 2 days prior," she said. "He seized me by the collar and slammed me into a concrete wall. He applied manual pressure to my throat in a manner consistent with what the Mercy North attending physician documented as traumatic manual strangulation." She paused. "I am a combat-trained medic. I am aware of my own capacity to cause harm. I did not cause him harm. I disengaged. I called 911. Everything that happened in that parking lot is consistent with a person choosing the minimum necessary response and immediately seeking official documentation." She held his gaze. "If your implication is that my training makes me the aggressor in a situation where I have documented throat bruising and he has documented nothing, I'd like to understand the logic of that." Raymond Gould looked at her for a long moment. He moved to his next speaker. Mara Solano spoke at 3:10, from her wheelchair, her voice steady in the way of someone whose steadiness was costing them something they decided was worth spending. She spoke for 8 minutes. She described the original incident 4 years ago, the complaint she'd filed that was quietly buried, the job she'd kept because she'd needed it, the years of careful distance and the moment she'd decided to come forward, and the night 3 weeks ago in the specific language of someone who had processed what happened enough to describe it without being destroyed by the description. When Raymond Gould began his cross-examination, the panel chair interrupted him. "Mr. Gould," she said, "given the direct physical evidence connected to the most recent incident involving Ms. Solano, the severity of which is already part of the federal evidentiary record, I'd ask you to consider carefully whether your cross-examination is serving the interests of this proceeding or complicating them." Gould looked at the panel chair. "I have no questions for this witness," he said. The room exhaled. At 4:30 p.m., as the final procedural elements were being recorded, Olivia's phone vibrated in her jacket pocket. She kept her hands in her lap and didn't look at it. When the panel recessed at 4:47, she took it out. A message from Webb. "Check local news, breaking now." She opened it. The headline read, "Harlow General Board Member and Former Chair. Subpoenaed in Federal Corruption Investigation, Third-Party Financial Records. Indicate payments predating Olivia Hayes. Complaints by 7 years." She read it twice. Then she read the name of the board member. She sat very still. The name was not Howard Belk. It was not any name she'd encountered in 11 months of documentation. It was a name she recognized from the hospital's annual report, which she'd read once in her 3rd month as a professional orientation exercise and then not thought about since. Dr. William Farrow, Chief of Medical Staff, board member for 11 years. The person who, functionally, sat above Patrice Dunmore and Howard Belk in the institutional hierarchy, and whom neither of them had ever mentioned in any conversation Olivia had been part of. She thought about Patrice in Dana's deposition. Voluntarily cooperated. Provided documentation of internal pressure she received. Pressure from whom? Dana had not specified. Olivia had not asked. She looked up from her phone. Across the room, Dana was reading the same news on her own screen, and when Dana looked up and found Olivia's eyes, the expression on Dana's face was not satisfaction and not surprise. It was the expression of someone who had known the excavation wasn't finished. Dana's expression said it all, and Olivia had learned enough about Dana Fry over the past months to read it accurately. This wasn't surprise. This was the controlled release of something that had been held in careful suspension. Olivia crossed the room. "You knew," she said. Not an accusation. A question with the answer already in it. "I knew there was a layer we hadn't fully mapped," Dana said. "I didn't have Farrow's name confirmed until 40 minutes ago. Torres called me during the recess." She looked at Olivia steadily. "I didn't tell you because I didn't have anything solid enough to tell. And I wasn't going to put a name in your head that might have changed how you presented today." Olivia sat with that for a moment. It was the right call. She didn't love it, but it was right. "How deep does it go?" she asked. Farrow was on the board when Carla Reyes filed her complaint. He was in the room when the internal decision was made to route it to Paulie's supervisor rather than escalate it independently. Dana's voice was low and precise. "The financial records show payments from a Voss Development subsidiary to a consulting firm that Farrow's wife incorporated 12 years ago. Payments that continued through Carla Reyes' death and through every buried complaint since." But she paused. He wasn't just looking the other way. He was being paid to look the other way. Olivia looked across the hearing room, at the emptying seats, the press pool packing their equipment, the defendant table where Raymond Gould was speaking in urgent tones to Marcus Voss's remaining legal team. "When does the subpoena execute?" she asked. "It already has. Farrow's attorney called him during the hearing. He's known for the past 2 hours. Dana closed her portfolio. "He resigned from the board 20 minutes ago. The hospital put out a statement." Of course they had. Institutions learned to move fast when moving fast was the only thing that limited damage. The same institutional machinery that had buried Olivia's complaints for 11 months was now generating press releases in 20-minute cycles, because the direction of protection had reversed, and that machinery didn't care about direction, only about output. Olivia looked at the statement Dana showed her on her phone. It used the words deeply troubled and full cooperation in the same sentence, which was the linguistic equivalent of both hands pointing in opposite directions. She handed the phone back. "It's not over," she said. It wasn't a complaint, just the truth of it. "Farrow will be charged," Dana said. "The timeline is 6 to 8 weeks based on what Torres told me. The financial records are clear. His involvement in the Reyes decision is documented in internal communications that Patrice provided. That's what she knew. That's the internal pressure she described. Farrow told her to keep the complaints internal and keep them quiet." Dana paused. "She didn't know about the payments. I believe that." Olivia thought about Patrice one more time. The woman standing in an imaging corridor saying for what it's worth and stopping at the limit of what she'd built her professional life around. Whatever Patrice Dunmore was, she wasn't Farrow. The difference mattered even when it wasn't clean. "What happens to the hospital now?" Olivia asked. "The board is in emergency session. 2 other members have asked to consult attorneys. The state health department is initiating a governance audit." Dana looked at her directly. "Harlow General is going to be a very different institution in 6 months. Whether that's better or just different depends on who fills the space." The verdicts came in stages over the following weeks, which was how justice actually moved. Not in a single cathartic moment, but in a sequence of procedural resolutions that accumulated into something that deserved the word. Marcus Voss pleaded guilty to conspiracy, bribery of public officials, and obstruction of justice 14 days after the hearing, when his legal team concluded that the financial records made a trial outcome predictable and a plea was the last remaining lever of control available to him. The homicide-related charge connected to Carla Reyes, criminally negligent facilitation of harm through deliberate suppression of a protective report, carried a sentence that the judge imposed at the upper range, noting in her remarks the duration of the conduct and the number of people affected. Life without parole was not the outcome. The specific charge didn't support it. What it supported was 32 years, with the conspiracy and bribery charges running consecutively. Marcus Voss was 61 years old. His attorney told the press that his client intended to appeal. His client said nothing. Derek was tried in adult court on 5 charges: the assault on Mara Solano, the assault on Olivia, 2 prior incidents from the victim's statements that met the evidentiary threshold for prosecution, and witness intimidation. His attorney argued diminished capacity and parental influence, and a version of events that required the jury to disbelieve 7 people who had never met each other and had independently arrived at the same story from 4 years of separate experiences. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. The verdict was guilty on all 5 counts. The sentencing hearing was brief and the judge's remarks were not. She spoke for 14 minutes about institutional complicity and the way systems that were supposed to protect became systems that selected for harm when the people running them decided that certain people's safety was a cost worth accepting. She used specific language about Derek Voss's age at the time of the original incidents, not as mitigation, but as the thing that made the adult failure more complete. He had been 18 when he started. There had been 4 years of opportunity for any single institutional actor to stop it. None of them had. Mandatory treatment, mandatory supervision, 12 years minimum before parole eligibility. Derek Voss was 22 years old when the sentence was read. He looked at his hands while the judge spoke, which was the same thing his father had done in the hearing room, and Olivia, watching the footage later on the news because she hadn't been in the courtroom for sentencing, thought about what it meant that they'd both learned the same way to be in a room where they were being held accountable. Eyes down. As if not seeing it made it less true. It didn't. William Farrow was charged 6 weeks after the hearing, as Dana had predicted. He did not go to trial. The financial records were sufficient, and his attorney was experienced enough to know when evidence had weight that legal argument couldn't move. He pleaded to 2 charges and received 7 years plus disgorgement of the consulting payments, which by that point amounted to more than $400,000 over 12 years. Ron Pauley and 2 other officers from his division faced internal affairs proceedings and state licensing review. 2 lost their positions. The 3rd resigned before his review concluded, which produced the same outcome through a different door. Howard Belk was charged with 1 count of obstruction. He negotiated a plea and received probation and permanent revocation of his healthcare administration credentials, which meant that the particular skill set he'd spent 20 years developing. The practice neutrality the careful language, the art of burying things in procedure, could no longer be applied in any licensed healthcare context for the rest of his professional life. Olivia didn't feel satisfaction reading through the outcomes. She felt something more like the recognition that consequences had been proportional, which was rarer than it should have been and therefore worth acknowledging without overstating. Harlow General's offer of reinstatement came with a formal written apology, which Dana had made a condition of any reinstatement negotiation. The apology was read into the public record at a hospital board meeting in February, 4 months after the hearing, by the newly appointed interim board chair. It used Olivia's name, Sasha's name, and the names of the 2 additional former employees who'd come forward after the news broke. It named the specific complaints that had been buried and the administrative decisions that had buried them. It was 12 sentences long, and it was the product of 4 weeks of legal back and forth, and it was imperfect in the way all formal institutional apologies were imperfect, because the form was built for liability management as much as genuine reckoning, and it was impossible to fully separate those 2 things. It was also public, documented, permanent. Olivia sat in the back row of the board meeting and listened to it read aloud, and when it was done, she did not cry and did not feel like she had won something exactly. She felt like something that had been said falsely was now being corrected, and that correction existed in the record where the false thing had existed. And that mattered in the specific way that accurate records always mattered, not because they changed what happened, but because they changed what was remembered. The new chief nursing officer, a woman named Dr. Sandra Ito, who had been brought in as part of the governance restructuring, met with Olivia individually the following week. She was 53, direct, and had no connection to the previous administration by design. "We'd like you to come back," she said, "and I want to be clear that this isn't about liability management. We're rebuilding the complaint handling infrastructure from scratch, and we need people who understand what the failure looked like from inside it." Olivia looked at her across the table. "In what capacity?" "Clinically, you'd be returning to the ER at your previous level, but I'd also like you involved in the development of the new protocols, the actual document, not a committee rubber stamp." She paused. "You documented 11 months of institutional failure while the institution was failing you. That's exactly the perspective we need when we're writing the policy that's supposed to prevent it happening to someone else." Olivia was quiet for a moment, not performing consideration, actually considering. "If I come back," she said, "and I see the new system failing, I'm going to say so. Formally, through whatever channels exist and outside them if those don't work." "Yes," Sandra Ito said simply. "That's the point." Olivia returned to Harlow General on a Monday in March. She clocked in at 6:47 a.m. Claire Alderman's article ran in late February, 2 weeks before Olivia's return to work. It was long, 3,000 words, the kind of length that regional outlets rarely gave to anything anymore, which meant someone had made a decision that the story was worth the space. It ran with a photograph of Olivia that had been taken outside the Civic Center building after the hearing, not posed, just Olivia in her coat on the concrete steps with the winter sky behind her, looking at something outside the frame. The piece was called The Paper Trail. It was not about Olivia as a victim. It was about Olivia as a methodology. It described the decision to document as a form of resistance available to anyone who found themselves inside a system that had turned against them. It quoted Dana Fry on what the records made possible in legal terms. It quoted Marcus Webb on what they made possible in investigative terms. And it quoted Olivia from their 90 minutes at her kitchen table at some length. The line that people pulled out and put in their own accounts, the line that started appearing in places Olivia didn't expect, was this one. "I wasn't documenting because I thought I'd win. I was documenting because I didn't want the institution's version of events to be the only version of events. That's all it was. Just make sure the truth has a place to live." She hadn't thought of it as quotable when she said it. She'd thought of it as accurate. The piece generated a response that surprised her in its volume and didn't surprise her in its content. Letters and messages, mostly from women, some from men, from nurses and teachers and social workers, and retail employees and junior staff at companies large and small, all of whom recognized the architecture she'd described. The complaint filed and buried, the instructions to not make this into a thing, the particular exhaustion of being the person who was experiencing the problem while also being told they were the problem. She didn't have time to respond to all of them. She responded to as many as she could. The last conversation that mattered happened outside the hospital, 6 weeks after Olivia returned to work. It was April, early evening, the river down to normal levels for the first time since November. Sasha was on her Tuesday shift, finishing up, and she found Olivia on the small concrete bench near the main entrance where staff sometimes ate lunch when the weather allowed. Sasha sat down beside her. For a minute, neither of them said anything, which had become comfortable between them in a way that it takes shared difficulty to produce. "I got my acceptance letter," Sasha said. "Nursing school. Full program." Olivia looked at her. "Which one?" "My first choice." Sasha's voice had something in it that was trying not to be too large and not quite succeeding. "I didn't think... When everything was happening, I kept thinking it was going to follow me. Like it was going to be in the record somewhere, this thing I was associated with." "It is in the record," Olivia said. "You cooperated with a federal investigation. You documented harassment of a fellow employee. You didn't walk away." She paused. "That's what's in the record." Sasha was quiet for a moment. "Are you glad you stayed?" she asked. "In Callaway Ridge, after everything." Olivia thought about it honestly, the way she'd been trying to do more of since the hearing. Not performing certainty she didn't have, not performing doubt she'd moved past. "I'm glad I didn't leave because someone wanted me to," she said. "Whether I stay long-term, I don't know yet. But that's mine to decide. That's the difference." Sasha nodded. She understood the difference. They sat for another few minutes while the evening traffic moved on the street and the river ran quiet beyond the east edge of the city, and ambulances came and went from the bay the way they always did, the way they would tomorrow and the week after, carrying the ordinary catastrophes that didn't make headlines and didn't reshape institutions, but required someone to show up and know what to do. Sasha said goodbye and went back inside. Olivia stayed on the bench a little longer. She thought about Carla Reyes, who had been 24 years old and had done everything right, and had still not been protected. She thought about that, not with the grief of something she could have prevented. She'd been in another city when Carla filed her complaint. She'd been living a different life. There was nothing to be done with that particular weight except carry it carefully and let it mean something going forward. She thought about the 7 people who'd come forward. About Mara Solano in her wheelchair, her voice steady, her presence in that room a specific kind of answer to the specific kind of question that Derek Voss had spent 4 years asking about what he could do to people and what they would do in return. She thought about Rosa Reyes texting a stranger on a Saturday morning in the snow. "I just wanted to say that. You don't have to respond." She thought about what Dana had said once, somewhere in the middle of all of it, during one of the calls where the process was slow and the outcome was uncertain, and Olivia had said something honest about not knowing whether it would matter in the end. Dana had said, "The fact that you don't know doesn't mean you stop." It wasn't a comfort exactly. It was better than that. It was the acknowledgement that courage rarely came with a guarantee and mostly had to be operated on incomplete information, and that the incompleteness didn't change the obligation. That was the thing nobody told you about standing up inside a broken system. They told you about the injustice, which was real. They told you about the courage required, which was also real. What they didn't tell you was how long the middle part lasted, the months of documentation and formal channels and careful language and waiting while the institution that had failed you continued to exist and function around you, and the people who'd made the decisions kept making decisions. They didn't tell you that the strength required wasn't dramatic. It was administrative. It was showing up at 6:47 and charting correctly and eating half a sandwich on a concrete bench and sending one more email and not letting the accumulation of ordinary indignities persuade you that you were nothing. It was refusing the version of yourself that other people tried to write. That was the thing Olivia had known, on some level, since the parking lot in November, since Derek Voss had put his forearm across her throat and told her to say she was nothing, and she had simply waited for him to finish and then done what needed doing. Not because she was unafraid, not because she was exceptional, but because she had learned, Through 4 years of combat medicine and 11 months of institutional combat and a lifetime of being the person who got up and rode to the end of the block before crying, that the people who told you what you were worth were almost never the right people to believe. You had to keep your own records. Not for them. For the truth, which needed somewhere to live. An ambulance rolled into the bay. 2 paramedics moved fast and clean, a gurney going through the automatic doors, the organized urgency of it familiar and purposeful. Olivia watched it until the doors closed. Then she stood up, straightened her jacket, and went back inside. She had a shift in the morning. She would be there at 6:47.